Here's a short introduction to the whole idea of Expressionism, both in terms of art, paintings, sculpture, and also Expressionism in film, especially the way it affected the German film industry of the 1920s, the so-called Weimar years. Before we look at this, we need to understand what German Expression was part of. It was a part of a much wider artistic movement known as modernism, the idea that society was progressing, that technology was making society better, people were becoming more free and also more equal, and that science was also creating new ideas and new understandings of the universe and the world around them. And so we get the beginning of the atomic age, as I mentioned before in the previous slideshow, the idea that Einstein could show that there were not just atoms, but these can be split, and even time and space were flexible. The idea that God was dead, that people were becoming much more secular in their views, and they stopped going to church, or at least believing in a sort of all-powerful God. We've got the beginnings of psychoanalysis, as I mentioned before, in terms of Freud and the belief in the unconscious, as I said in the previous slideshow. You've got the Russian Revolution, the Great War, how a major, massive impact on that, not just immediately, but right through the 1930s, right, what you could almost say, even to today. The Great Global Depression, most people talk about it in like the 1930s, but really you've got a great deal of unemployment and economic hardship right through the 1920s, and mainly about the rise of the avant-garde, this group of ideas and artists who would go beyond what was acceptable and pushing the boundaries again and again. And to some extent, the German Expression was part of this. Okay, so what was Expressionism? Well, first of all, it was expressive in terms of colour, in terms of shape, and in terms of what could be shown in terms of form and fantasy. It begins early on. We can see it quite often in figurative art, so most famously in Edvard Munch's The Scream, painted around about 1893. It's about the idea is the inner vision of the artist expressing itself in the outer world around him, and we can see this in the character here screaming, we know not why, but the whole world around him is affected by that. So we're going to give some examples of German Expressionism. Just going to spend some time just going through these, try and get an idea of what is expressive about each of these, and how these can be related to the films that you've been watching. So here we have an example called Die Brücke, or the Bridge. This was a group of artists who started before the First World War and continued right through the war itself in terms of painting ideas and feelings that they experienced throughout this period. The Blaureiter were another group of artists that had been around, that also formed a collective and were painting what we call expressionistic art. This is more about non-objective art, i.e. it was more abstract, it was not directly reflecting the world around them, or when it did, it was not so obvious. What I'd like to do now is actually go back and look at the paintings of the Blaureiter and also De Bruyck, and try and write down some ideas about how expressive they are, ways in terms of colour, in terms of abstraction, in terms of form, and how we can see that in the films that you've seen so far. So if you could do that, first of all. What you can also see here is another type of painting, another strand, if you like, of Expressionism. This came before the First World War. It was done through the Viennese secession. These were a group of painters who were in Vienna, not in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, not in Germany, but broke away from the academy. The key one here is Gustav Klimt, in a very famous painting called The Kiss. So how does it affect Expressionism in cinema? Okay, well, you've got definition at the bottom here. Expressionism is expressing the essence of things. Well, we talked about Germany, and we looked at it in terms of the film industry. Before the First World War, it was very small. German film obviously affected directly by the war because German films were bought by France or America or Britain, and so its marketing was directly affected by this. To combat, the German state itself bought large areas of land, set up studios to make propagandist films for Germany. Now you can see the figure there, production increased rapidly from a dozen to well over 100 companies within 7 years. By the end of the war, the need for overt militarist propaganda disappeared, and the film industry began to tire of mimicking the success of foreign countries. So in other words, what you've got here is there's no point in making films about the war which you've just lost, and rather than just do what everybody else is doing, some filmmakers said, let's make something specifically German, and they looked for a type of Germanic themes, ideas that they could use. And of course, they could use German Expressionism, which had been used as a painting style and also an architectural style and a theatre set design style for about 20 years already. So we've got two unconventional unknown directors, Karl Mayer and Hans Janowitz, sought to make a film in an unprecedented stylized fashion. It has also been proven successful in theatre, literature and architecture, as has been mentioned already. They developed methods that compensated for lack of high budgets. Obviously they didn't have a great deal. Germany had very little money straight after the war. Remember, this film was being made in 1919, 1 year after the war. And by using symbolism and mise-en-scène to insert mood and deeper meaning into the film. Okay, so through the use of form there, as you can see, is a clear example. Acting as well, exaggerated style, angular gestures, set design. The whole film was basically filmed on set in Babelsberg cinema studios, film studios just outside of Berlin. And also decor becomes overpowering, it mimics things. So here we have a still from Nosferatu, and we see the Count Orlok walking through an archway, which is a direct representation of the shape's head. Everything seems to look as if it's about to collapse in on itself. It doesn't look like it in any way realistic. Okay, set designers were often out of work, so architects were actually used on the design side of the film. Characters were often based around the ideas of madmen, of sleepwalkers, about child murderers, about mad robot builders, scientists. It's a world of fantasy and science fiction and horror. As I mentioned before, here are the key themes, including the supernatural, madness, betrayal, and other intellectual topics. Well, who are the key films and directors? We mentioned Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu by Murnau, which is the first Dracula or vampire film in 1923, and Metropolis by Fritz Lang in 1927. It's no accident a lot of these directors then go on to Hollywood to make films. Fritz Lang was very successful in Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s and 50s, now less so, makes one film which is seen as a classic in Hollywood called Sunrise, but then dies in a car crash soon after. And so ends the review and slide. Thank you.